1,700 people died in minutes, but their homes weren't touched. There was no fire, no flood, and no violence. Just silence. It was a tsunami of gas that drowned them in open air. This is the physics of the lake that exploded. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Okay, let's get into this. We are diving into a truly singular and a deeply unsettling event in the history of natural disasters.
It really is.
This is an anomaly, a cataclysm that claimed 1,746 human lives, 3,500 livestock, and it did it all in just a few minutes.
But here's the thing that makes it so terrifying.
Yeah.
Every building, every car, all the vegetation, it was all left completely physically intact. You're looking at the anatomy of an inevitable killer.
That paradox is exactly why we need to analyze this. The disaster at Lake Nyos in Cameroon in 1986.
Absolutely. The scene itself suggests something impossible. Total biological devastation, but laid over this pristine, untouched landscape.
So our mission today is to really dissect this invisible flood, to solve what is at its heart a scientific puzzle. Death by suffocation, but in the open air.
Drowning without water. And I think it's critical we understand the sheer terror of the event itself first, before we even touch the physics of why it happened.
Let's set the stage then. The date was August 21st, 1986. We're in the remote volcanic highlands of Cameroon's northwest region.
Right. And these small, peaceful communities were just nestled around Lake Nyos, which is this deep, normally very tranquil crater lake.
And everything was normal until about 9 p.m. that evening.
And the first people to arrive the next morning, responders like Father Tenhorn, what they found, it just defied description.
It sounds like something from a movie.
He described villages that looked like they had been paused in time. Mud brick houses were still standing, dishes were on tables.
People were found just as they were.
Exactly, lying peacefully in their beds or sitting by fire pits. But everyone and everything was dead.
And what really stands out is the completeness of it. This wasn't selective at all. It wasn't just the 1,700 people. It was all the cattle, the dogs, the birds, and this detail is just chilling.
Yeah.
Even the insects.
Yes. There was a specific note in the reports that sticks with you. Witnesses said there were no flies on the dead.
The gas killed the flies too.
Total, absolute silence fell on those valleys. Now, if we look at what the victims experienced, it really highlights the terrifying speed of this thing.
What did the few survivors report?
Those who were on the edges of the cloud, they reported hearing a loud rumbling sound just before it hit. Some described it as the shouting of many voices right around 9 p.m.
And then the onset was just immediate.
Almost instantaneous. People lost consciousness within seconds, maybe a minute at most. And that's the key. That's why there was no panic, no struggle.
The bodies were found exactly where they had been resting. Medically, it was just pure asphyxiation.
Precisely. And that rapid onset explains some of the stranger accounts from survivors.
Like the snoring.
Exactly. They reported hearing victims snoring during the event. But it's so important to understand that was not sleep.
No.
Forensic pathologists figured out that was the sound of the tongue collapsing due to deep coma, or what's called agonal respiration.
The brainstem's last desperate attempt to breathe.
The final struggle for air just before death.
And there was another point of confusion early on, the burns on the victim's skin. I remember reading that some people thought it was hot volcanic gas or some kind of acid.
That detail really fueled some incorrect theories at the start. But forensic analysis was critical here. It proved pretty quickly these weren't thermal or chemical injuries at all.
So what were they?
They were something called comatose bullae, pressure necrosis. Basically, they're blisters that form when an unconscious person lies completely immobile on a hard surface for hours.
So it's a secondary effect.
It was proof. Proof that the victims went down fast and stayed down, motionless, for a long time. It wasn't the gas that caused the blisters. It was the coma caused by the gas.
So the death was fast, silent, and horrifyingly sequential. This cloud wasn't stationary. It traveled.
It flowed. And it was completely governed by the topography of the land. In Lower Nyos, the village right next to the crater, mortality was almost 100%.
But it got stranger farther away.
It did. As the cloud moved down the valleys, reaching towns like Cha and Subum, maybe 10, 15 kilometers away, the mortality became chaotic.
What do you mean by chaotic? If the gas just filled the area, wouldn't everyone be affected?
No, and this is the crucial part. This substance was heavier than air. So imagine a house sitting in a little dip in the terrain, and another house just 50 yards away on a small hill. People in the low-lying hut died. Those on the higher ground survived.
So this invisible flood literally flowed like water, seeking the lowest point.
And pooling there, lethally.
Yeah.
The effect of this silent killer stretched up to 25 kilometers. That's over 15 miles from the lake itself.
The efficiency of this killer is just terrifying. A peaceful lake suddenly breathes out this silent cloud that travels for miles and wipes out life without touching a single thing.
And here's the question, the terrifying question that hung over the entire scientific community for years.
Right.
If this was just gas, and they figured out pretty quickly it was mostly carbon dioxide, why didn't it just float away?
Why didn't it just dissipate into the atmosphere?
Exactly. Why did it hug the ground and hunt people down for 15 miles?
That is the pivotal question. Because gas should diffuse, it should become harmless. For it to stay low and track victims, the physics had to be completely unique.
Which brings us to the core science of this invisible flood.
If you're finding this deep dive valuable, take a moment to subscribe to make it make sense. New topics are broken down every week.
This was a limnic eruption. Sometimes it's called a lake overturn.
And it all starts with the lake itself, Lake Nyos.
Right.
It's a deep, narrow lake, a lake inside a volcanic crater.
Right, and the key to the whole puzzle is its structure. The lake is meromictic.
Meromictic. That sounds technical, but break that down. How does that make a lake a time bomb?
Think of it like a bottle of oil and water that you can't shake up. It's permanently separated into layers.
Okay.
Most lakes we know, they experience seasonal turnover. The surface water cools in the fall, gets dense, sinks, and mixes everything up. But in Nyos, the tropical heat keeps a warm layer on top, the mixolydian like a permanent lid.
And it never mixes with the deep water.
Never. The deep, dense layer, the monomylidian, is totally isolated by a barrier called the chemicline. And that isolation is the setup for the whole catastrophe.
So the deep water is trapped, whatever gets in there stays there and just accumulates.
And the fuel that was accumulating was carbon dioxide. CO2 made up over 98% of that massive release.
Where did it all come from?
It wasn't from the lake bed. It was seeping up from cooling magma about 80 kilometers deep in the earth. It rises through faults, dissolves into groundwater, and then feeds the lake bottom century after century.
And with no mixing.
The deep water just became super saturated. It was holding far, far more gas than it should have been able to. A truly gargantuan geological time bomb.
And that accumulation process, it all hinges on one thing, pressure. This is where Henry's law comes in, right?
That's absolutely it. Henry's law is simple. The amount of gas a liquid can hold is proportional to the pressure above it.
The classic soda bottle analogy.
It's the perfect analogy. The gas stays dissolved until you pop the top and release the pressure. Now, at the surface of the lake, you have 1 atmosphere of pressure, but at the bottom of Lake Nyos, 210 meters down.
The pressure is immense.
It's around 21 atmospheres, 21 times the pressure. And that immense weight of water was the cork, holding a staggering amount of CO2 in solution. The whole system was just waiting for something to knock that cork loose.
So what was the trigger? What uncorked this massive soda bottle?
The scientific consensus points to a mechanical shock. A landslide or a big rock fall, probably triggered by heavy seasonal rain that plunged into the lake.
So not a volcanic eruption from below, but a shock from the side?
Exactly. Just an external disturbance that upset the stability of that water column.
And that one shock created a catastrophic feedback loop.
It did. The trigger forced some of that deep, gas-rich water upward, even just a little bit. As it rose, the water pressure on it dropped instantly. And when the pressure drops,
the CO2 has to come out of solution. It starts to bubble.
Violently. And those bubbles made the water-gas mixture suddenly much more buoyant.
So it started rising faster.
It accelerated upwards, dragging even more deep water with it, which then released its gas, which made it rise even faster. It was a runaway, self-sustaining chain reaction, a fountain effect.
And that created a massive plume of water and foam shooting into the air.
About 80 to 100 meters high, yeah. And it also generated a huge tsunami within the lake. Okay, so that explains the eruption. But now we're back to the critical question. The cloud leaves the lake. Why did it stay low and kill for 25 kilometers?
The answer is twofold. The density of the gas itself and the unbelievable volume that was released. The estimate is around 1.2 cubic kilometers of gas.
A cubic kilometer? That's hard to even picture.
Imagine a cube of gas over a kilometer long on every side. And it didn't float away because CO2 is 1.5 times denser than the air around it.
1.5 times? So it's not a cloud, really? It behaves like an invisible super heavy fluid.
Precisely. It wasn't a cloud that dissipated, it was a liquid torrent. a gravity current. It collapsed onto the lake surface, and then it just flowed over the crater rim like water.
And the valleys channeled it.
The valleys acted like aqueducts. The models show this cloud, maybe 50 meters thick, was trapped by the landscape. That's what kept it concentrated and allowed it to travel for miles, pooling lethally in every low-lying area.
And there was a visual clue, too, that this overturn had happened. A very dramatic one. As that deep water erupted, it brought iron-rich minerals to the surface. The second that iron hit the oxygen in the air, it oxidized.
It rusted.
And turned the entire lake a murky rust-red color. The lake essentially bled out, confirming the deep water had been completely displaced.
It's an incredible piece of scientific detective work. But the debate that came after was critical, wasn't it? The volcanic hypothesis versus the limnic hypothesis.
Yeah.
Why was that distinction so important?
That debate was everything for the future of that lake. If it was a sudden, hot volcanic blast, it's unpredictable. It's unstoppable. There's nothing you can do.
Right.
But confirming the limnic hypothesis, that this was just a slow, predictable buildup of cold gas over centuries, meant the disaster was preventable. It wasn't an unstoppable force. It was a time bomb that you could actually defuse.
And that realization led to this remarkable engineering project, the diffusing project. They decided to actively siphon the gas out.
Yes, and they used the very physics of the disaster to do it. Since 2001, they've installed these self-sustaining degassing pipes.
How do they work?
You use a small pump just to get the flow started. But the moment the deep, gassy water rises in the pipe and the pressure drops, the CO2 starts to bubble out violently.
And once it bubbles, the water inside the pipe becomes much lighter than the water outside.
Which creates a perpetual, self-sustaining flow. The expanding gas bubbles become the engine. They literally built a massive, continuous soda siphon powered by the lake's own lethal energy.
So what's the status of that today? Is the danger gone?
The project has achieved a steady state. The gas being removed now balances or even exceeds the natural recharge from below. So the immediate threat of another catastrophic eruption at Nyos it's been drastically reduced. It's a real triumph of science over a geological monster.
It's an incredible achievement. But the story for the survivors, that takes a much darker turn, doesn't it? Proving not all threats can be engineered away.
Absolutely. The geological threat is mostly contained, but the humanitarian disaster was tragically compounded. Survivors who were displaced for decades, they tried to move into resettlement camps like Bua Bua and Kimbi.
But then human conflict intervened.
In 2020, during the Anglophone crisis in that region, those camps were burned down. They were forced into displacement all over again.
They survive an invisible cataclysm from the earth, only to be hit by the all-too-visible forces of human conflict. It's a heartbreaking contrast.
It is. I think the core lesson of Lake Nyos for you, the learner, isn't just about geology. It's about recognizing accumulated potential energy. The tranquility of that lake wasn't safety. It was just a mask.
And science was able to master that hazard by applying basic physics.
But what's really fascinating is that this disaster put other, even bigger time bombs on the map globally.
You're talking about Lake Kivu.
Indeed. Lake Kivu, between the Congo and Rwanda, it's vastly larger, holds thousands of times more gas, including methane, which adds an explosion risk. The lesson of Nyos is that the biggest risks are often lurking silently, right below the surface, and they require constant vigilance.
And yet, the ultimate tragedy remains.
It does. We mastered the physics of the earth beneath the lake. But the humanitarian disaster was compounded by human conflict, which proved far, far harder to engineer away. And that's a thought worth sitting with.
The lake killed silently, without touching a single building. But there is a fire that destroys the body while leaving the room untouched. Click here to see the human candle and the terrifying physics that explain why spontaneous combustion is impossible, yet the bodies are real.